Everybody. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're just getting started here with Madison Alley's Fireside Chat, and we're delighted to have all of you joining us here. We had over 200 people that have registered for the event, and as we see people coming in right now, we'll get started in just a moment. While we have a moment, we'd just like to let you know of our next event, and then we'll get started here and begin to introduce Doug, Stacey, and David as well. Our next event is on May 20th at 1 p.m. and we will have a fireside chat on marketing and data analytics with featuring a panel of Jonah Goodhart, who's the founder and CEO of Moat, and as well as Alex Langshore, who is a co-CEO of Cardinal Path. So with that, we'll get started. First of all, thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope that everyone is safe and well during this time of crisis. We have here a very special fireside chat on leadership in a crisis, and our distinguished panelists here come from Silicon Valley, Doug Knopper, Stacey Bishop, and David Yuan from TCV. So let's get started here. So first, let's introduce our panelists. Doug Knopper, as many of you know, is the co-founder and former co-CEO of FreeWheel, which he developed one of the leading video ad technology platforms that was ultimately acquired by Comcast for $375 million. And prior to founding and building FreeWheel, he was the SVP at DoubleClick. Stacey Bishop joins us from Scale Venture Partners. We're delighted to have you here, Stacey. And Scale Venture Partners manages over $1.5 billion of assets under management. The latest fund is a $400 million fund. Scale typically invests between $5 to $25 million in their investments. And some of Stacey's notable investments include HubSpot and Bill.com, both which IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. And then some of her marketing tech investments include ExactTarget, which exited which is the email marketing and social media cloud platform acquired by Salesforce for $2.5 billion. Omniture, the web analytics platform business that was acquired by Adobe for $1.8 billion, and Vitru, the social media and analytics platform acquired by Oracle for $320 million. We also have David Yuan joining us, and of course, delighted to have David's perspective. David is a general partner of TCV, Technology Crossover Ventures, and TCV manages $10 billion under management. Their latest fund is a $3.25 billion fund, and TCV invests typically between $50 million to $300 million per investment. Some of David's notable investments include, 4 IPOs and 8 M&A exits, including investments in Facebook and LinkedIn, which was subsequently IPO'd and then was acquired by Microsoft. And in the marketing tech sector, investments in ExactTarget, which was acquired by Salesforce for $2.5 billion. Merkle, the CRM and data marketing services agency acquired by Dentsu Aegis for $1.5 billion. And AppNexus, the programmatic ad technology platform acquired by AT&T for over $1 billion. David's also been featured on the Forbes Top 100 Tech Investor list. We are particularly excited about this event because we have Doug's perspective as a former founder and CEO, Stacey's perspective as an investor at the venture capital stage level, and then David Yuan, of course, investments at a later stage level. So thanks very much for joining us, Doug, Stacey, and David. We'll now, just to give you a little background on Madison Alley. Madison Alley, as many of you know, is a strategic M&A and capital advisory group. We specialize in digital marketing, media and advertising, technology, data, and services, and have done so since 2003 for over 17 years now. We're based in New York City with significant presence in Silicon Valley and San Diego. And we're advising clients on capital raises between $10 to $150 million with M&A transactions between $25 to $250 million. We're fairly distinct in that we're led by all former CEOs and corporate development executives from the digital marketing and media, advertising, technology, data, and services sector. So let's begin here. The agenda that we have for today is that first Doug will bring us through a presentation on leadership in a crisis, and then we'll begin, so that'll be about 15 minutes or so. And then the distinguished panel here with Stacey, Doug, and David will begin, and we'll cover 4 main topics. One is leadership and effective leadership in a crisis. 2 is clients and sales growth and management in challenging times such as this. 3, launching products. And 4th, cash management and capital decisions with advice, particularly from Stacey and David. So with that, I'll hand it over to Doug, and Doug will begin his presentation on leadership in a crisis. Thanks very much, Doug.
Great, thank you, Michael. And hi, everybody. Hi, Stacey. Hi, David. Nice to be here today, although the circumstances are obviously very strange indeed. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So I think we are entering kind of the 3rd phase. And by the way, I'm going to go through this really, really quickly. There's a lot of information here. Obviously, we can spend some time on this afterward, or happy to talk about this offline, but I'll go through as much of it as we can very quickly just to give the high level. I believe that we're now in kind of the 3rd phase of this crisis. The first phase in March was just the panic phase. Oh my God, what are we going to do? The sky is falling. You know, the stock market was dropping dramatically. In April, and these roughly corresponded to 1 month periods. In April, we got more into the planning. How are we going to figure out how our companies are going to survive? We're going to start laying off people. We're going to start applying for loans. Government help was starting to come. We're putting in our long-term plans, or at least our medium-term plans and things like that. The 3rd phase that we're entering now, we can go to the next phase, and this comes from the state of California, which is we're now starting the plan for reentry. We're not at the point where we're getting to reentry, but we're starting to figure out what reentry is going to look like. And in California, you have a 4-stage plan that Governor Newsom gave a couple of days ago, which is basically how we're going to start to put, what are the milestones and what are the triggers for when we can reopen various workplaces, various government spaces, and recreation and so on. I believe that that 3rd phase is the phase that business, and particularly startups and small companies, are about to enter. And I also believe that we are in a period right now at this moment in time where it's still kind of quiet, and we as companies have the opportunity to start figuring out what needs to be done and start making those plans and answering the critical questions of what the new normal is going to look like. So if we can go to the next slide, I also see that in reading a number of things, and this comes from a study by Edelman, is that we're not going to get a lot of guidance particularly from the federal government, maybe from the state government, but this is going to be on CEOs and companies and boards to figure out what the new normal is going to look like. Leadership is going to come from the CEO and the company level. And so, I've been seeing this in a whole number of areas where the CEOs that are getting in front of this and are leading this, you see this from CEOs of Slack and Carta and others, who are being very open and very transparent with their employees and figuring out what needs to be done and communicating with them in a very open fashion, are the ones that are getting in front of this. And those companies that are doing that will find ways to turn this into competitive advantage. And so again, I believe that this period that we're in for the next few weeks prior to reentry is a critical time for CEOs and leaders of companies and boards to start getting in front of what might happen. And as I say, it's going to be the CEOs that are going to do this because the government is not going to do this at all. If you can go to the next slide, Lena. We are seeing, however, that the governors are in the state and at the state and local level are leading a lot of the charge here. And while I don't put this last point here to make any kind of political statement, but I do believe that more leadership is going to come from the state level and the local level than we would normally expect to be coming from the federal level. And so all of this leads to an opportunity for CEOs and companies to be leading the charge on what's going to happen. I believe that there are three areas primarily that companies should start to be looking at. What I'm going to do in the next couple of slides is go through a whole bunch of questions. And obviously I'm not going to spend any time in any one of them, but things you should be thinking about. And they fall into three categories: the workspace, the legal, regulatory, finance issues, and sorry, I forgot the last one, regulatory, I think. Anyway, let's keep going on this. On workspace, the key areas that need to be thought through today are social distancing rules. How much space, how are you going to lay out your floor plan for your company? Can people still work in the open environment? How are meeting rooms going to work? Can you jam people into small meeting rooms? We used to have, if you have conference rooms where you have 10, 15 people, is that still going to work? What about kitchens and shared snacks and things where you used to, dip into the M&M jar and things like that? Who's going to clean these common areas? Usually there's some faceless, anonymous company that comes in the middle of night and clean things. What about the bathrooms and elevators and kitchens and so on? More importantly, what about the things that you press every day? Touch screens and switches and phones and common keyboards and things like that. And the door handles. If somebody is infected or somebody gets sick in your office, who's going to clean it? How is it going to be decontaminated? Who are you going to call to make sure that happens? Who's going to alert the building management? Who's going to alert other employees that you shouldn't be coming in or you need to leave or something like that? How many people are allowed in the office at any given time? How many guests are going to be allowed in, if any? And how are deliveries going to be handled? All of these things are things that we need to get in front of. And again, this is the period to get in front of that right now. We can go to the next slide. So that then gets us into policy issues. When are we going to reopen? Who's going to show up on what days? Is it just going to be business as usual and we're going to go Monday through Friday? Or are we going to have special hours? Are we going to have staggered hours? Do employees have to wear masks? What are the work from home rules? What if people are more comfortable working from home for the short term, maybe for the long term? We don't know. We've proven it can work. Look, we're on a Zoom meeting here. What happens about parents that, they don't have schools anymore, they can't get childcare, and they must work from home? Which then gets you, what's the definition of a sick day? We want to encourage people that if you aren't feeling well and you think you're coming down, you don't want them coming into work. So you actually want to give an incentive for people to take sick days, not as a penalty with a limited number. Same for a vacation day. People might need to take vacation days for other reasons other than being sick, and maybe we want to encourage that. Maybe it's something that we just need to help them out with. How do we meet clients and internal teams? Obviously, at some point in the future, we're going to have to go visit clients. We're going to have team meetings. We're going to have interaction with, physical interaction. How many people are going to be allowed to do that? Who's going to be allowed to travel? What are the restrictions on travel? And then, getting to work is a whole nother category. A lot of companies encourage commuting, which is the right thing to do environmentally and things like that. Is it the right thing to do in the time of a pandemic? We go to the last slide, please. Next slide. Or not? No? Not going to the, there we go. One more. Or no, sorry, this is it. And then from kind of the regulatory and legal and finance issue, how do you handle the accruals for sick days? So right now in most companies, sick days are accrued and they are on the balance sheet in some form. What happens if we increase that, if we decrease that, if we go to unlimited? Are we insured for health liabilities if somebody spreads the disease? I think the whole concept of insurance for this is still unclear. What happens if an employee declares that the workplace is unsafe or unclean, or they don't feel like it's appropriate for them to come there? Do we have risk? Do we have liability? Is there somebody in charge? In California, we have designated earthquake safety officers for most companies. Do we have to declare who a safety coordinator will be? Is there somebody that we're going to designate to be the person that's walking around cleaning it? As I mentioned before, touch screens and switches and so on. Some of this we've gone through. The slide is backed up, but in any case, who's going to alert management to this and other employees? What's the impact on employees' privacy and confidentiality rights? So are we allowed to talk to employees about their health? Today, you're probably not allowed to, or in the past, maybe now we have to. Can an employee's temperature be taken every day, or some other test as they come through? Can that be taken every day? And is there somebody designated to be allowed to do that? And how does that impact the confidentiality and privacy rights? I don't mean to do this to overwhelm or to give a whole bunch of questions and that seem kind of random. But if you can go to the next slide. I believe this is an opportunity for companies to gain a competitive advantage by thinking through some of this. If maybe the companies that have an office nurse or a help desk, maybe it's time to bring back a nurse on site in most locations. Maybe it's time to expand on our family care benefits, some sort of child care benefits, some sort of child leave or family leave benefits. I think that the whole concept of real estate needs to be thought through. You can make an argument that we need more real estate for more private space as opposed to jamming people into open spaces and few conference rooms. Maybe we need more private offices, more private conference rooms. You could make the argument that we need less and more working from home opportunities, which we've now shown can work. The bottom line for me is that these are the roles and the opportunities for a CEO and leaders of the company and a board to get involved with today, to show that you're in charge of this, you're on top of this, you trust your employees to do the right thing, you care for your employees, and you're actively involved in that. And I believe that getting in front of these things during this next phase of the crisis, prior to the full re-entry phase, will make a huge difference and will be a competitive advantage to those companies that are able to get in front of this now and will be able to get out of it in a much more beneficial way down the road. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Michael, and we can have a discussion on that.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Doug. That's also very insightful and a lot of excellent information. For all the audience that is listening here, we will make available the presentation that Doug just walked through. There was lots of questions and good insights in there that will be shared, and this recording itself will be shared. So we now have Stacey, David, and Doug together here. And so this is an excellent segue from Doug's presentation to begin with leadership. So as the three of you think about leadership and as you're talking to your portfolio companies and advising them, what practices are you seeing that you think are particularly effective in terms of leadership, whether that be any visions, providing visions to companies, strategic planning, communication, executing, inspiring their teams? What is it that you're seeing? Stacey, perhaps you want to begin with this question?
Sure. I mean, now more than ever, this is a time for grace under pressure. I think this is one thing for leaders to try to remain not super emotional, but be empathetic. We've seen this is the most difficult time. This is probably the most trying time for CEOs they've ever been through. When we look at our portfolio, we've had companies that have had to do layoffs remotely. That's never been done. And then have to, get the team together remotely. You can't pop into someone's office or, talk to them in person. So all of this has to be over the phone. And what I've seen working well is trying to keep this positive attitude, try not to be emotional from the leader standpoint. The employees will be emotional, but trying to be positive about, we can see a way through this. We've had some companies that have had to take some significant layoffs. And it's incredibly hard, but the leaders got to stay positive and set forth the vision that it can be done. And whether it's, companies suddenly going from a high growth plan to a cash flow break even plan, trying to understand how that, sets the tone for now the company's going to be in control of their own destiny if they're in charge. They're not they don't need us, the venture capitalists anymore. They can carry on. And what a different tone that sets, and see it as a positive. And so that's what we're seeing, is just really being that strong leader with, and positive and not super emotional.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
I think there are two really fundamental things to keep in mind here. That first of all, the employee base are scared and vulnerable and just as concerned as we all are. Everybody's in this together, but they're looking for leadership right now. And I think the companies that, as I mentioned when I was talking before, Carta with Henry Ward, when he put out his note about what it's like to lay off, I think it was 10% of your staff, was from the heart and was thoughtful and was rational and well reasoned out, and people understood it. And I think that level of transparency and that level of honesty goes a long way with an employee base that is looking to trust a CEO, that, you know, to know that that person, he or she, has the right plan in place. And then secondly, I would say, and playing a little bit off of what David and Stacey said too, is that the CEO's role is going to change pretty dramatically in these times now and going forward. And if you were a very product-oriented CEO or very finance-oriented CEO, it might be that you have to delegate some of those responsibilities. It might be that you're going to have to get more involved in what we would normally think as HR or communication issues, and you might have to you know, give some of your product thoughts to somebody else, because this is going to require the full-time hands-on involvement. And if you as a CEO aren't great at that, and that's not your core strength, you're going to have to find people that can, and rely on people that can help you at the board level or a consultant level or an external level.
Great. So David, we see you're back on here. So I think you're actually on mute right now, but would you like to answer as well? No. There you go. Great.
Nope.
No. Technical difficulties. We still can't hear you, Dave.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. There we go.
Okay, awesome. All right, we'll see how this works. I think the only thing I'd add is once you have a stable base, really energizing the team around three things. One is it's wartime, and not to use a strange analogy, but it's wartime, and so that gets people really energized about the immediacy and what you all can accomplish. And I think the second two things are recognize that the car's in the shop. It's so hard to work on your business when you're growing really fast, and so there's all sorts of things that you want to do as it relates to your UI, your architecture, your business model, your go-to-market model, that you just don't have a chance to really disrupt the business when it is growing so fast. Recognize this is a real opportunity to really work on the engine, because your car's in the shop, and the next thing is every one of your competitors' cars are in the shop. And so that if you take advantage of this, you know, quiet time and really work on some of the fundamental things, as soon as you get to the future state, you can really rip through this and really take market share coming out of it. I think the final piece is really focus people on the future state. There will be a future state. We will get through this, and some of the best companies really scale through downturns like this. You know, Facebook had a down round in 08, 09. And obviously Google was built in the last .com recession, the recession before. So if you take the hard actions up front, you can get people looking forward, really focus on the long pole tent things in this quiet period. You can really charge out of this and just keep people energized along those three fronts. I think you can make some real progress in this COVID environment.
And David, with that, do you want to comment on you know, how can you effectively get the organization on board and get them inspired in challenging times, and to keep everybody aligned and moving in the right direction, do you think?
Yeah, I think Doug said it well, which is you lead with transparency, right? You all work with adults, very seasoned executives, very mature executives, and if you show them the problem set, which is, you know, in many markets, demand's down 60, 70, 80%, and travel, actually, you have negative bookings because of cancellations. That is the market we're faced with. And as soon as you, one, recognize it yourself and share it with your executives, then I think people kind of get the joke, and they get really guys with how do we have our company survive. I think the other aspect is the customer centricity. Customer centricity is a big deal during peacetime, but it's incredibly important right now. And so I think getting your executives, whatever function they lead, to really align to your customers. They're there for a mission. They're there to serve customers in peacetime, wartime. That increasingly so aligns the team against what you need to do.
Yeah, it's a great segue. So let's now talk about clients and the importance of that. So it's a difficult time to be selling and to be maintaining client accounts and relationships, let alone building, you know, getting new clients on board and growing the clients. How, you know, have you seen effective ways, given that many clients are cutting budgets, it's difficult to have in-person meetings, Have you seen effective sales strategies and anything that you might advise to clients? Doug, perhaps maybe you want to begin this one as a former CEO.
Sure. I think that there's a couple of principles that you have to keep in mind as you start looking at this. Your clients are hurting just like you are, some more than others, and they're all looking for some kind of relief, whether it's immediate cash flow, whether it's suspending payments, something like that. And I think that if you can be creative and try and figure out what their objectives are, there are things that can be done. I have one company that's providing software to dentist offices. And they've, just like David said, they've just been kicking ass and growing at 50%, 60% per year. And now that's just completely screeched to a halt. And a large number of their clients have come to them and said, can we suspend payments? So what we've done is we've taken the kind of the direction that we will allow them to suspend their payments for a certain period of time, as long as they increase I can't remember what the formula is, but something like for every 3 months of suspended payments, they have to increase their contract by 1 more year. So you can imagine what that starts doing for your TCV. They could end up being out of this, coming out of this crisis with maybe a doubling or tripling of their TCV. And sure, they took a short-term cash flow hit, but I'd take that any day of the week. So I think those kinds of creative approaches to this really, really will go a long way. It'll make their customers loyal to them, and it will help the company from both sides. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done along those.
No, that's great. Stacey or David, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, especially for some of the companies whose sales may not be happening now, we're seeing the doubling down of the effort on the customers. And to Doug's point, seeing creative things happening, because you just don't want your customer to churn. So while it's really difficult, some are kind of having this low level, still paying, but almost like a pause kind of status, because they don't want to lose the customer and have them churn and then have to go try to resell them again, try to keep the customer happy, give them a, bare bones subscription kind of thing, so they get to keep their data for a period of time, and so that we can help power, all of us power through this period. But so we're seeing creative ways, and I think you can earn a lot of goodwill with your customers. And some companies are hoping that churn goes down because people won't be looking to switch, particularly in fields that are somewhat crowded. So, take advantage of that. Your revenue might not be as off as you think, because if you can keep the churn down, even though you're not selling, you might be able to keep the base stable.
Yep. Yeah, great. Great. So the next question, so this is a segue, for one of the points that you mentioned, David, in terms of, building the engine or refining the engine while the car's in the shop. So let's talk about product and reimagining products and solutions for this new market environment. How do companies and set themselves up to be innovative and launch new products during this environment? David, would you like to begin with that?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sure. Maybe a general comment, then a specific one to go good at. Generally, things like architecture, things like UI, it's just or onboarding processes. It's too easy to just sort of punt that to whenever we slow down. And so again, this is a great opportunity to get at it. And those are multi-core, multi-year products, our builds. I think specifically to COVID, I think the really interesting opportunity here is, as Doug mentioned, your customers will tell you exactly what they want. They're screaming out for help. And then the second piece is you're sort of shoving 6-7 years of adoption into a so far, call it 6-week period. And so things like digitization, things like bringing processes online are seeing incredible adoption in a very short period of time, incredible trial. And so what does that mean tactically? I think if you talk to your clients and you talk to them around their search for revenue, oftentimes they will directly lead you to specific products that you want to consider. And then as you think about filling near-term gaps of COVID to generate revenue to your clients, and if it aligns to long-term product roadmaps, i.e. the digitization of certainly these industries, it's a total no-brainer. And so you redirect much of your product spend, or perhaps all your product spend, to the key products that matter, both short-term and long-term. A great example of this is one of my portfolio companies, which similar to Doug's example, operates in the restaurant space. They sell software to restaurants, and if you look at OpenTable's data, just say the GMV is down anywhere from 100% to 80% to 60%. Really stark numbers. I'm super proud of what they've done. They've really reached out to their customer base, really tried to help save them in a number of different ways, but they realized that this movement to digitization, online ordering was fundamental to survival to their end market. They launched the product just 4 weeks ago, and now it's literally delivering billions of GMV to their end customer base. So a true lifeline, and it's an incredible business for them. And so again, if they were to look at, if we were talking as a board six months ago, we would sort of say restaurants, most of their commerce is in store at the location, and online. The online channel is quite interesting, and it is the future of the industry. But from 6 months to now, it's everything, and so it's a real opportunity. I think depending on your end segment, depending on what you sell, there may be some analogous opportunities there.
Yeah, well, that's also a great example of a company pivoting or moving very quickly from what was maybe not the highest priority to all of a sudden in very short order, pivoting probably the critical component of their business just to survive, and that now thriving. So it's certainly a good example. Let's turn our attention towards to cash and to capital. Stacey and David, we'd certainly appreciate your perspective on this. So how would you advise company leaders, marketing technology company leaders, and investors at a time like this? How much cash to hold? How to, whether to raise capital, given that valuations and terms may be different. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about cash management and considerations of capital in this environment.
Sure. I can start on this. We went through an exercise with our portfolio of trying to look at, this is the portfolio perspective, but I think it applies at the individual level of companies of, who has to raise money this year. And our advice to our companies was try to not have to raise this year. Do what you can to extend your runway, whether it's draw down the debt, cut your expenses, whatever it is, to extend your runway so that you don't have to go to market right now. So that was our advice. Of course, there might be a couple of companies that do it, and there's a little bit of a world of the haves and have-nots. There are still rounds getting done. They were likely probably underway before all of this happened, for what I'll call the classic companies where they have incredible numbers. And so people are still making those investments but for others where it might seem a little bit more challenging, it would be, try to put it on hold. And most of our companies have multiple forecasts because we don't know when this is going to end. I don't think Q1 companies were hit, but I think the real hit will obviously be Q2. So trying to get that sense, and maybe you're getting signals now of what's happening, but I think that's the hardest thing. So keeping your financial models very fluid to take into account different scenarios of what's happening, because every week we're getting more and more data. The good news is, just talking to a couple of my companies this week, they started to feel like re-engagement was happening in the past couple of weeks. March, they couldn't even reach out to a company without almost offending them. Early April, still kind of the case, but now it seems like people are sort of coming up for air, and they're at least being receptive to client interactions. The question is, will they close or not? And I think this is the true test of, where you are on the priority stack for marketing leaders. Are you a, must have? Because we are seeing budget shifts. There's no longer events, in-person events. So that budget shift either will get cut or it might get reallocated. So in some cases you might see some reallocation, which would be good.
So that's very interesting, because we've had this issue with some of our clients in terms of forecasting. And one of the things that you suggested was that some of your companies are creating multiple forecasts and fluid and be more fluid. They probably have a lot more visibility into Q2, whereas Q3 and Q4 may be a bit more uncertain. But it sounds like they're presenting to the board and putting plans together in various different scenarios based on the recovery. Is that right?
Right.
And would you suggest, is that helpful from a board?
I think so. And making it very clear, one of the things is board, management, and making it very clear what the differences are between the plans. I've seen anywhere from 2 plans to 3 plans. I think any more than that is just too much to handle. But creating more high-level plans that are flexible so that you can change it, if you start to move towards another, the more downside case.
Yeah. And also one of the things you mentioned was about having cash on hand for at least through the end of the year. Is that even sufficient? I mean, in normal times, we may even suggest even 12 to 18 months. Is that, yeah.
At a minimum, if not, we're well into 2021 is what, I would say a year from now is what we'd like to have cash for our companies. So that you can avoid having to go to market. And some companies were drawing down the debt if they had it, but then you want to be careful that you don't draw down too much debt and you put yourself in a difficult situation.
Exactly.
I'm asking my companies, particularly the early stage ones, to have cash through the end of next year. And it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. David, anything that you'd like to comment on any of that? Would you agree with as Stacey had suggested?
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. Maybe a couple of tack-ons. One is in terms of raising money, it's definitely bifurcated between haves and have-nots. And if you have any doubt, then you should assume that it will be really challenging to raise money. It may change as venture capital firms start to reawaken, and we're all going through our own version of what I described. But if you have doubt, I would assume that would be very challenging at this point. I also think that the convert market is white hot to the extent that you're looking at different forms of debt. I actually been quite surprised how cheap that capital is on that side. And then in terms of scenario planning, I like what Stacey mentioned. And, the way we think about it is we take a pretty draconian sort of baseline case on revenue, fix the OpEx budget, and then see revenue as it comes in. So you more or less keep the OpEx budget constant, and then you go through a rolling forecast on revenues. And the nice part is many of these categories and markets actually have a lot of online data. So, for example, if you understand hotel bookings for the travel segment by geo, by city, by type, that there's indexes that one of my companies like mine are published, and there's I know that various different industries are publishing real-time data. So it's a good resource as you think about scenario planning.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so what about for the companies that, let's say ideally you'd like to have at least 12 months of cash, if not through, as Doug said, even through the end of next year. But what about for companies that are getting short on that? And at the same time, the environment is not conducive really to raise capital. The terms aren't as attractive as you'd like. So would you suggest for those that are not in an optimal scenario that they focus entirely on their business and running that and optimizing that, or going out and getting prepared to raise capital so that they're prepared for a long haul?
I think that makes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, please go ahead, David.
I think that's really important consideration. If you don't think you can raise cash, that's your reality. And so, rather than spending time on the road talking to venture capitalists, you should think about how to generate cash through your expense base. Unfortunately, there are some government programs, but I think it's important to time is also scarce as well, just given you have pretty lean teams. So facing the fact that it may not be easy to raise money for the next quarter or two or even a year, as again Stacey mentioned, is important.
Okay, great. Anything that either of you want to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. I mean, one option is we are seeing in some cases, like even if the round was done 2 years ago, that maybe opening up the one option for fundraising, if you're not in that have category of like where people are still coming, is potentially opening up the last round and talking to investors who you've known in the past. It might be worth doing that if you really want to get capital. And we have seen a couple of companies do that where it's a smaller round, but it's getting money in the door and getting a couple of new players who might know the company well. And, it's obviously dilution, and it's frustrating because as a company, you'll say, oh gosh, we were, 10 million in revenue when we raised that round, and now we're 30 today. Like that just feels unfair, but that cash might be worth taking that dilution in order to get that cash in the company. So that's another consideration if you're in that predicament.
Yeah,
I would add to that too, playing on what Stacey said. I think that if you have a relationship with the VC firm, even if they said no to you in the past, your odds of having an interaction with them are higher than trying to find a new relationship with someone. I think most of the seed VCs that I've been talking to are early stage. They're all saying our doors are open. We're still talking. But nobody that I know, and I'm curious, David or Stacey, if you have, I don't think anybody has made a deal with a company that they have not met in person. So I think having those relationships is a big deal. And if you can, and the other thing I would say too is, to what Stacey said, this is a time when you might have to sort of swallow hard, and the cost of money is much higher. 2008, FreeWheel in its Series B, we did a down round, and it was painful, but it was the only way we could raise funds at that time, and we had to do it. So I think these kind of things happen.
Obviously, it paid off for you in the long term.
In the long term, it hurt.
Yeah.
Right.
What are your expectations as investors of companies' pace of growth? Have they changed since 60, 90 days ago, when your companies were growing at a certain pace? And so now this is a different environment. So do you have different expectations of your companies now in terms of priorities and pace of growth relative to cash management and capital issues at this point?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think efficient spend is the key. No longer will those companies that were kind of eking by with this sales efficiency that was kind of mediocre, but they had a lot of cash on the balance sheet, so they were able to go really fast. I don't think that will be acceptable anymore. So companies will want to see that or investors will want to see if they're putting money into companies, it's going to be spent effectively. So the cost of sales is really critical. And I think growth rates expectations might be a bit, down in terms of, we won't be expecting the tripling in the same kind of way if a company's acquiring companies at an effective rate.
Interesting. Okay. And so even as you're looking at new investments, do you have different, criteria that are more accommodating for aligned to the market today, where the pace of growth you can understand is not, what you may have been looking for, 3 months ago?
Yeah, that might be the case. I mean, because just a thing that I'll add is, one thing that's been interesting in the last 5 years in the venture market is companies are growing faster, but it's primarily because they're just raising a lot more money. They're not necessarily more efficient. And we looked at data across a whole swath of companies. Now, there's obviously a select few that I would call in that have category who are growing at this super efficient rate, and they're seeing incredible viral growth or whatever it is, even in the enterprise side. But most companies, they might be growing faster, but it's only because they're spending more money. And so I think that will we might go back to the way it was, especially if companies don't have access to that level of capital like they did, where they'll grow at a more measured pace, but it'll be the same sales efficiency.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, it's very.
It's interesting. I'd agree with Stacey in terms of overall growth is down, but we've seen really disparate demand. And so across our portfolio, roughly a third are actually growing faster, given COVID. A third are certainly hitting massive headwinds, and then a third are about the same. You can see it in, I think Visa published its data. I want to say that card not present was up 30%, and card present was down 40%. So 70% delta. And so I guess, Facebook was able to handle April as a flat year over year. So subject to because of the DR engine. So I think it really depends on the end market, and I think this is a pretty obvious comment, but go to where the growth is, because there is growth out there.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so that's a good segue to, we received an interesting question from one of the attendees about, throughout the marketing and ad tech sector, including data and anywhere else, data and services, are there opportunities? So first, I presume, first question is, are you continuing to invest across MarTech and ad tech and this sector? And within there, are there subsectors that you think there is particular opportunity? David, perhaps you want to begin?
Sure. Yeah, we're certainly, we continue to look at it. It's a core segment of our investments. In terms of sectors that were interesting, I actually don't think it has changed for pre-post-COVID. If anything, COVID's actually been a little bit it's not a little bit, but a big tailwind in terms of digitization, and obviously offset with budget. So if you think about online presence, we were a big investor in Sitecore as a leading CMS player. The historical transition was sort of sites to brand and marketing experiences to now, I think, I think the big emphasis is actually bringing more and more of what you offer your customers online. And so true experiences for sites that are not just sites, but actually look like products. And so there's a lot of things associated with that. There's the analytics piece. There's actually disaggregated content from the actual experience, commerce from the actual experience, so headless type of architectures. And so that's actually one area of strong interest of mine. I think as you think about, again, digitizing your experience, part of it is how you engage with the customers. And there's also obviously a massive shift from a consumer standpoint from other forms of communications to messaging. And so, software and to extent blended services that address that are really interesting.
Great. Stacey, anything that you want to add in terms of sexual?
Sure. I mean, we're just seeing where machine learning or automation can be applied to the traditional, MarTech type companies. So that's always interesting, where you can kind of take the human out of it, and now it's happening much more automatically. So, I mean, obviously you've always had that on the ad side, but even more so just in general across MarTech.
Mm-hmm. And how much acceleration are you seeing of digitalization and even virtual environments and innovation there and how much of that is of interest to you? Just in terms of large enterprise clients, retail clients having to really accelerate their expenditures towards becoming more digital and e-commerce focused and if not, even virtual environments in many cases.
Yeah, from data standpoint, I'd point out that there's a 70% swing between offline and online commerce, right? That shows you that massive acceleration of digitization, and probably 6 months ago wasn't that. The growth rates are roughly similar, although there was a spread. Anecdotally, one of the headless content companies that I spent time with mentioned 2 weeks ago, a cruise line tried to do a massive enterprise deal as they're trying to get their customer service processes online to deal with cancellations. It's like cruise line, the ground zero for COVID headwind. So I think it's a really powerful trend, and some of it will be COVID sort of indexing up, but generally I think it's a long-term secular trend that will be really sticky, and so we're pretty bullish.
Great. Okay, Stacey, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just the dramatic shift, if you think about the retail market right now, of consumers being online and everything that can be done, and just all of it now, that all shopping and everything, the time spent online, companies definitely have to make that shift. So I think there was a tweet that somebody had where somebody's multi-year digital strategy just got compressed down from several years down to months. Mm-hmm. And so it's particularly these big enterprises that had been maybe slower to move now suddenly have to do it immediately.
Mm-hmm. Doug, anything you want to add to that?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is that in the area in which I spend a lot of time with is anything with streaming or advertiser supported video. And needless to say, we're seeing just the growth rates of that just increasing dramatically. And what that's doing is kind of breaking a lot of parts of the system. So to what Stacey said, where you had roadmaps for some of these companies that here's how we're going to lay out our players and our platform and our e-commerce capabilities over the next 3 years, they've got to dramatically decrease that. So anything related to video, there is just increasing, and kind of the scale of that is rapidly just moving up and to the right.
Mm-hmm. So here's an interesting question. David, you had spoken about when we spoke about getting on the offense, and so I'm sure you're considering this for some of your portfolio companies. But what about for you and Stacey as an investors? Is there are you spending more of your time and your attention on existing portfolio companies, and to what extent do you think that TCV or scale can be on the offense, and are there opportunities to invest in this environment?
Yeah, 100%. I mentioned that some of the best times were recessions. Some of the best investments were placed in recessions. So we are definitely we've gone through the evaluating the portfolio, making sure our portfolio companies are strong and stable to really lean forward both privately and publicly. So my hope is over the next couple of years we'll invest in some great companies and generate great returns for our LPs.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, Dave and I were both in this market in, 08 and 09, and in fact, did an investment together back then with Exact Target. I think one thing looking back is us as a firm is we didn't do more during that time, even though it was really hard. So we're definitely open for business. I would say the biggest struggle, as we said, is that, we've had that discussion of that inability to do the in-person meetings, so that, there's a little bit of a slowdown now, but I think, we're definitely open and we're looking at things, but it's probably more along the lines of companies we had interacted with in the past. Though that being said, literally this morning we were talking about a company that was brand new to us, but probably the one link is we know the earlier investor really well. So it's a, known, trusted investor. So that's another route, is that if there's an investor set who knows certain VCs really well, I think that can help, because, depending on how long we're in this environment before in-person meetings can happen. I think VCs have money and are open for business.
Would you invest in a great company that you've never met face-to-face?
I don't know. That's a question. I mean, I would have to, I don't want to say no, because you might meet that great entrepreneur that you really are able to connect with over in this environment. I think it just takes some getting used to. But again, it probably helps if you know some people around the table.
Yeah. I think the first company that does that and the first VC that does that is going to be very famous.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly seed investments that are happening.
For sure.
Like
Yeah.
But it's as someone, I was on a call with someone, and this applies more to David TCV, but writing $100 million check over Zoom, like who wants to take that $100 million check and who wants to give that $100 million check? Like when you get to these large dollar amounts, it becomes pretty scary.
Yeah.
But it might just be a huge, we as people need to adjust to this new environment where there is less in-person interaction.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this is his point, and to
go ahead, David.
Give a little hope to the audience. I think it's 1.4 trillion in dry powder in private equity. So there's money out there.
Yeah. And so
you go find it, but.
So I was, we had a chat this week with Ben Barakis, who was the founder and CEO of AdMeld. And so one of his interesting comments was exactly as you were saying, David, about that some of the great companies have been built in environments, of recession type eras. Are there certain attributes within times like this that you think kind of predicate or can provide for companies that ultimately become some of the most successful? What might those be?
Yeah, I mean, there's part of it is the environment. I think you referred to this, which is there have and have-nots, and so your ability to access capital becomes a huge differentiation. And then as a result of the environment, much of your inputs, right, your people, your marketing dollars, et cetera, get quite a bit cheaper. And so I think if you're in that fortunate position with access to capital, I think that's great. I think the other aspect is, and I think Doug may have referred to this earlier, if you can sell product in this environment, the signal to noise ratio is very, very high. I think the third piece is coming out of this, companies with
oh, damn
it. We're losing you again, Dave.
Companies with
capital. My word, you're better.
Yeah, I think we just lost you.
Yeah.
Dave, I think.
Damn it! I want to know. I want to know the rest of that sentence.
I know, it was good. He was frozen.
Oh,
he's back.
Oh, he's back.
Can we hear
Companies
you?
with.
Did it? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I was getting excited. Companies with the trust and respect of their employees, companies with the trust and respect of their customers, and cash. You were so well positioned, and whereas in a buoyant time, it's really hard to make any meaningful acquisitions. It's really hard to take a lot of market share. If you have those three things, you're going to crush it. So the job as CEOs and boards is to really get the company in shape to go execute against that vision and keep people focused on it. So I think they're actually. Well, I didn't walk in here to be an important platform for the next decade. So I think it's a great opportunity.
That's great. And Stacey, you were talking before about the sales efficiency. And so it seems like some of the best companies will be enlightened, will shine in times like this, particularly because of their sales efficiency. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, this really is the sort of stack ranking of the nice to haves versus the need haves. The need to have companies will really shine during this period of time. And it becomes clear. I mean, like we're seeing it, companies on the infrastructure side, security, fraud detection, all of those things are seeing actually a tick up, what to Dave's point in the portfolio. And the companies that are kind of falling in that nice to have, it's figuring out ways that you become more need to have. And that's kind of the cars in the shop. Can you figure that out type thing?
Yeah, and maybe we'll just leave with one last question that we received from the attendees here. So none of us, there's uncertainty in terms of how long this pandemic will last and the crisis will last. So as you're considering investments, there could be a large opportunity in the short term, or this could extend for a much longer period. So to what extent do you factor in this environment, given that the environment may stay for a short period of time or may stay for a much longer period of time? Anyone want to answer that? Stacey, you want to begin maybe?
Yeah, well, I missed the first part of that question because I was reading another one of the.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. So to what extent do you factor in the environment today, given that this current climate that we're in may stay, or it may be a short period of time, or it may be a longer period of time? How much do you weigh that into as you're making investment decisions?
Yeah, I was caught up on that handshake question over there, so that's what
saw that too.
Anyway, no, I think that I think the great companies will still manage to have sales, and so you really will see this separation between that what I was mentioning earlier, the nice to have versus need to have products. So that will help determine what our interest level is, because obviously if something's flying off the shelves now, I think it will continue. Now, I think on the consumer front, which we're not covering, that's a different story. You might get these weird blips of people buying things now that may not buy in the future. But I think in enterprise, if sales are happening now, then you're in that category of like, wow, enterprises really need this.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a very important distinction. Okay. Anything else that anybody would like to add at this point? We're just about to wrap up the hour.
No, I just want to comment on the one question that popped up about without a physical handshake.
Okay.
I would like to meet someone in person, but I don't have to have a physical handshake. I could do a deal without that, but I'd like to meet them in person. But maybe we even have to overcome that as well.
I think to Doug's point, it will certainly be notable, any investments in that come about of this, and probably particularly large capital investments that come out without a handshake or an in-person meeting. So love to see it. So thanks very much, the three of you. We really appreciate your perspective. This has really been helpful. Of course, we appreciate the attendees joining us here, but having the experience of Doug, you as a former CEO, and Stacey and David as investors, this is really a lot of excellent tangible insights from different stage of investment that you come at this. So thanks very much. We really appreciate it. As we mentioned also, this recording will be available to all the registered attendees. We'll also be glad to share Doug's presentation. So we'll distribute that. And just one other reminder that on May 20th, Wednesday, we're excited for our next Fireside Chat, which is on marketing, data, and analytics. And as noted, that will include Jonah Goodhart, who is the founder and former CEO of Moat, which was acquired by Oracle, and also Alex Langshore, who's a co-CEO of Cardinal Path, the data analytics group, which is part of Dentsu Aegis Network, along with Merkle. So thanks very much for joining us, and everyone be safe and be well. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.